We're still continuing with Wherever You Go, and we're encouraging ourselves in this new year. We talked about the big decision we have to make, about singing a song, and about so much plunder that He gives us when we obey and listen and step forward. Today's is called Pursued by Panic. Psalm 10 is one of the chapters written by David that describes his back and forth relationship with God, much like ours. He starts by asking God why He's so far away and hidden right when He needs Him. I have felt that way when God is silent as I'm crying out for help or direction. He then talks about the wicked and how their ways always seem to prosper, and how arrogant and prideful the wicked are, and how they lie in wait for their victims. And this writer, David, definitely knew what it was like to be pursued by an enemy. Then David writes what we all say at one time or another in verse 11, that God will never notice. One of the lies we all believe, that when we're facing something ahead that we cannot fight against, we think God is unaware and that He doesn't care. Then this writer has a little burst of faith as he exclaims, "Arise, Lord, lift up your hand, O God." And he starts talking to his soul and reminds himself that God does see the trouble of the afflicted. He does consider our grief, and that He is the helper of the fatherless. And in that progression comes the declaration in verse 16 that God is Lord and King, and He hears the cries of His people, and He encourages them. He defends the fatherless and oppressed against all strikes of terror. We forget the truth that sometimes that God's Son came and suffered just as we do. My son sent an excerpt from a book over the holidays to all of us with this reminder that said this: He Himself has gone through the whole of human experience, from the trivial irritations of family life and the cramping restrictions of hard work and lack of money, to the worst horrors of pain and humiliation, defeat, despair, and death. He was born in poverty and thought it well worth His while. And that's referring to Jesus. God never forgets us, and He's never far away, even though we sit in silence and loneliness at times, especially during times of great struggles like being pursued by something or someone that wants to harm us. Remember Psalm 23? That valley of the shadow of death where howling animals and scary things lurk in the dark? He says we can pass through without fear. I haven't arrived at the no fear pinnacle in my life. I still stumble in my faith, and I become fearful when needs arise that I can't fix, or when losses occur that wreck my heart, or when hope wanes. So I can relate to this writer as he questions. Then he stills himself, and then he states what he knows to be true, and this is encouraging. It's a progression, this walk that we're on. We're going to stumble and feel as though darkness is closing in on us at times, and we're going to be tempted to focus on the character of the enemies against us, like financial ruin, loss, death, grief that's too heavy to carry, and those enemies that rear up and threaten to literally defeat every ounce of faith that we have. It's then that we can shake ourselves, brush off the dust of discouragement, and speak to our souls and to our God as we speak out loud of His defense against everything that fights against us. It's a sequence, this encouragement we're seeking to find, and it always starts by recalling His faithfulness. Remember when Jesus was hanging on the cross and He's suffering the worst of torture, rejection, and humiliation, and He cried out to His Father and said, "Why have you forsaken me?" And then He submitted Himself to the Father that He knew, the one who sent Him to die and to live. You're not dying yet, and while you're living, you have dark corners in your path, but you have a God that goes before you to illuminate your steps. And even when we all die, we can lay back in His arms and submit to the promise of the life hereafter. Go ahead, ask your questions, stir yourself, and then speak aloud to remind yourself that He's acquainted with all we've been through and will ever face, and He trusted His Father, and so can we, even when we're pursued by panic.